absolute value is like how far something is from 0, so it's always positive. It's measuring a distance, and distance can't be negative. So how do you show absolute value? What symbol? Two vertical bars. All right. Then let's talk about our properties of absolute value. If I said the absolute value of x equals 5, what does that mean? Right. You make two equations. Anytime you drop an absolute value, you do two equations. One of them you just take the absolute value away. The other one you set it equal to a negative. What if I said say the absolute value of x plus 1 equals the absolute value of 2x plus 3. So if I have those absolute values on both sides, what do we do? You always make two equations, a positive and a negative. The positive here is really just you drop your absolute values. The other option, you have to distribute a negative through one side. Doesn't matter which side, but you take a negative through one. Okay, so those are the equations. We'll either see equations with the absolute value on one side or both sides. But either way, you set up two different equations to solve. Set equal to positive, set equal to the negative. Now with our inequalities. If I said the absolute value of x is less than 2. You guys remember what that means? Less than. So if I said the absolute value of x is less than 2, then you did one inequality, -2 is less than x is less than 2. Because if you think about what this means on a number line, the absolute value of x is less than 2. That means your distance from 0 has to be less than 2. So you could be 2 above, or you could be 2 below. And so you get just everything in between those numbers. Does that make sense? So less than is the less than. That's like your and. You make one big inequality. Greater than, so that's your great or, it's your or statement. And the first inequality, nothing changes. Or the other one, you flip it and make it a negative. So either x is greater than 2 or x is less than -2. If you think about what that means on a number line, if x is greater than 2, that means our distance from 0 has to be more than 2. So you would have to be smaller than -2 or bigger than the positive 2. So less than, that's your and, one inequality, one big inequality. Greater than, that's your or, you make your two separate. Any questions about that stuff? So let's just start solving some. One thing to remember on any of these problems, before you get rid of your absolute values, you have to isolate it. So if I give you something like the absolute value of 2x minus 1 minus 4 equals 6. Before I set it equal to +6 and -6, what do we have to do? We have to get that absolute value by itself, so we have to add our 4 over to begin. the absolute value of 2x minus 1 equals 10. Always isolate that absolute value first. Then we make our two equations. The first one, nothing changes, you just drop your absolute value. Second one, you drop the absolute value and make it a negative. So then to solve, if I add over my 1, divide by 2, I get negative 9 halves and positive 11 halves. I want you guys to solve a couple equations for me. Are we okay with this one? So here are yours. Solve each of those equations for me. So the first one you set equal to positive 7 and negative 7. Subtract your 9. Divide by negative 4. So you get a 1/2. And positive 4. And just like any other equation, you can always check these. You should just be able to plug them back in. Alright, B. The first one, you just drop your absolute values. Second one, you run a negative through one side. So if we solve, if I subtract over my x and subtract over my 2, I get 2x equals negative 7, so x is negative 7 halves, or negative 3.5. Second one, add over your x, subtract your 2, and you get 3 equals. Any questions about the equations? Let's look at this one. So the extra value of 2 minus 7x minus 1 is greater than 4. What do I need to do first? Isolate. I don't have that absolute value on the side by itself, so I need to first add over my 1. Now, it's a greater than, so that's or. So we make two different inequalities. The first inequality, you just drop the absolute value. What do you do for the second one? You have to flip the inequality and make it a negative. So greater than 5 or less than negative 5. So then if I subtract my 2, what happens when I divide by negative 7? Flips. So it becomes a less than negative 3/7. This one I divide by negative 7, I get greater than positive 1. I will expect you now to write things in interval notation, since we've done that. So the equations, you just write the numbers. But if it's something like this, I want an interval. If you need to, think about a number line here. Less than negative 3/7 would look like this. Greater than 1 looks like this. It's a greater than, that was an or, we get two separate pieces. So it's from negative infinity to negative 3/7 union 1 to positive infinity. Let's look at another. I'm going to make this less than or equal to. Okay, first step. I'll let you guys work it. Most of you are anyway. So you subtract over your 6. This is a less than, which means and. So you can make two separate inequalities, but it's easiest if you realize it's an and just to make one big one. Negative 8 less than or equal to 5 minus 8x is less than or equal to 8. Now, that doesn't mean if you wrote two separate ones that you're wrong. You could do 5 minus 8x is less than or equal to 8, and 5 minus 8x is greater than or equal to negative 8. And then when you get to the end, you're just going to have to interpret that answer. But if you recognize from the beginning, less than means and, it's going to be one big one. So it's just going to fall in between two things. So we could set it up like this. And we've solved these compound inequalities. I have to get the x by itself, so if I subtract 5, divide by negative 8, which will do what to all of my inequalities? Okay. If you solve these two others separately, that's fine. You're going to get x is greater than or equal to negative 3/8, and x is less than or equal to 13/8. So we kind of get to the same point. Now we just have to figure out what that means. If you think about a number line, this says 13/8 is greater than or equal to x. So equal to means bracket. It's saying x is smaller than that. This says x is bigger than the negative 3/8. So it's just in between those two numbers. So it's bracket negative 3/8, comma, positive 13/8. Because of the equal to, they both get brackets. So a lot more of you erasing that time. Did you do two separate ones instead of one big one? So, okay. So if you did those two separate, what you have to remember, greater than is or, less than is an and. So if you got to this point, it's an and statement, so I need both things to be true. So greater than or equal to negative 3/8 would look like this. Less than or equal to 13/8 would look like this. And says, tell me the overlap. What part of that number line was shaded by both of them? It's just that middle section, which is the same answer we got. So if you separate them, that's no big deal. You just have to watch how you write your answer at the end. Do we need another one like this? What if I said the absolute value of x minus 4 is less than 3? Would you make two separate or one big one? Less than means and, so you can do one big one. Negative 3 less than x minus 4 less than 3. So then if we add our 4, we get 1, it's less than x is less than 7. Okay, if you think about what that means, saying it's bigger than 1 but smaller than 7. So it's just that little interval from 1 to 7. Typically a less than, you're just going to get that one little parenthesis. A greater than is when you get your or. Any other questions? Almost done. I just want to talk about a couple quick things. So on this one, it's an equation. With the equations, we always set it equal to a positive and a negative. Can you have a positive 0 and a negative 0? No. So all that means is you only have one equation to solve. You just set it equal to 0 and solve. B. Do you notice anything about this? Greater than means or. Whenever you have an absolute value on one side and a negative on the other, we need to stop and think. Absolute values are positive, right? How often is a positive bigger than a negative? Positive bigger than a negative? Always, aren't they? So no matter what I plug in here, it's going to be true. So what would I write for my answer? All real numbers, but what notation do we use now? Yeah, you're using the interval notation. Now, you could still get this by working it out, but if you ever have a negative on one side and an absolute value on the other, you can probably just look at it and tell the answer. If you worked it out separately, so it's a greater than, which means an or, so you do two separate ones. So in an and, you're looking for the overlap of what gets shaded. In an or, you take everything that gets shaded. So greater than 7/6, less than 11/5, what got shaded on my number line? Everything. So that's why it works. All right. Last one of these. The absolute value of 2 minus 5x is less than or equal to negative 5. So again, I have an absolute value on one side and I have a negative on the other. This is saying an absolute value, which is positive, is less than a negative number. Positive number ever smaller than a negative number? No. So this one is no solution. So just watch when those special cases pop up. It's when you have an absolute value on one side and a negative on the other. Okay. Can I do one last slide? I just want to talk about, there's 3 little examples and then I really am done, I promise. I keep saying that, but this is really it. I just want to see if we could write this sentence using an absolute value. So, or write this statement. So we're not even going to solve. We're just trying to write it with absolute values. So if I said K is no less than 5 units from 8. Which 2 things am I measuring the distance between? K and 8. So those go in the absolute value. To measure distance, you subtract. And inside the absolute value. And it could be k minus 8 or 8 minus k. No less than. If it's not less than, it would have to be greater than or equal to. And how far apart did we say? 5. So the absolute value of k minus 8 is greater than or equal to 5. Okay? N is within 1,000th unit of 6. So in the absolute value, you subtract the two things you're measuring the distance between. What are those? N and 6. Within, what does that mean? You guys know? Less than. My point 001. And very last one. M is no more than 9 units from 3. So which two things am I measuring the distance between? M and 3. No more than. This is like the last 3 questions on your homework today are just going to ask you to write these. So no solving necessary, you're just writing the answer guide. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left. So a couple things I want to mention. Here is the homework. I'll say the first section is matching, and the last 3 are just writing those inequalities. So it should go pretty quickly for those. You guys, I'll let you choose. We are at the end of chapter 1. We are picking up, remember I'm not doing tests like necessarily per chapter right now. We're kind of breaking things up. We can either do a smaller quiz over section 7 and 8 tomorrow, or I can teach one more section before we do a quiz. I will say the next section is on functions, and there's quite a bit of stuff in there, you know, domains and ranges and function notation, those kinds of things. So would you rather do the smaller quiz now or wait until I teach one more thing? Smaller quiz now. So I will probably, tomorrow at the beginning class, we'll grade homework, and then I'll do some review problems, and then we'll do that quiz, if that's okay with everybody? Yes. No, 1 through 8 is all. Those are matched.